Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are discussing national political news of the day. Our first topic, Biden's border and immigration plans. He is being very active on this. Congress is not taking any action. There's a lot of politics there. As we've discussed on shows in the past, my contention is that the Republicans have to be very frustrated with Donald Trump because they have had the opportunity to vote in probably the most draconian or conservative border bills, immigration in general bills that they're ever going to get. And they had to pass on it because Trump needs to have immigration being one of the two big issues of his campaign, the other being inflation, which he may also start to lose as an issue in the campaign as the weeks go on. So he desperately needs it, and so he desperately needed for that bill not to pass. So Biden is taking independent action. He's issued an order for the border, which has been interpreted as draconian by a lot of immigrant advocacy groups, and we've discussed that in the past. It happened last week, and because he's been attacked by those groups, he has then since come up with some immigration reforms that he's hoping. Well, I don't know what he's hoping, but that may or may not be overturned by the courts. When presidents give these executive orders, sometimes they hold, sometimes they don't. It depends on not just what the article, what the Constitution gives to the presidency, but it also depends on what type of discretion Congress has given them. And so he has, but he really doesn't care. All he has to show, well, he may or may not care. I don't want to say that, but politically speaking, he has to show that he's trying to do something, that he can pass something and get something done. And if the courts overturn him, he says, well, see, I tried. Congress isn't doing anything. Courts have handcuffed me. What can I do? Right? That's what he will do. And the courts probably won't overturn him for a few months. And he'll show do nothing Congress, obstructive courts that Trump and Mitch McConnell appointed. What can I do? Go to the voters, right? So it's a pretty good strategy. And if they don't overturn it, well, then he's got his policy wins. And among the things that he's done is he's offered legal status to about 500,000 spouses of U.S. citizens who are undocumented. That it used to be you could have an anchor spouse, right? Up until 9/11, that changed. And this would kind of reinforce that. I mean, it's not for everybody. You can't just get across the border and then pay somebody to marry you. It's not going to work that easily, but there are some aspects there. And then also he's reinforcing some DACA protections. If you are going to college and you're doing certain things, you may be able to find some protections under his program. We can get into more details in the program, but he is doing some things to benefit the immigrants. Republicans are crying foul, calling him a dictator for issuing executive orders. Of course, whenever a president starts issuing executive orders out of frustration for Congress not doing something, the opposing party calls him a dictator. Same thing happened to Trump. Same thing happened to Obama. Same thing happened to Bush, all the way back to at least Reagan. So this is what is happening. Biden has he's got his border bill. The immigration was actually the crossings at the border were going down even before he passed it. This might have some effect, but he's getting a lot of flack from the left of this party, and but they are happy with the reforms that he just ordered. Dave, you want to get into some more details there?
Yeah, sure. So I think, as I'm wont to do after your extensive introductions, I typically want to start from that 30,000 foot view. I like that approach. So I'm just going to kind of throw it out there that, we are experiencing right now. There is, a broad-based support for reform because there is something dysfunctional at the border. It's widely believed to be the case. There's somewhere between 12 and 20 million people, depending on who you're looking at, that have come across the border through non-conventional means, basically. And we have a climate of pervasive economic anxiety. But at the same time, like the majority of farm workers, the majority of meatpacking industry are people who are considered potentially these are folks who have migrated here, not necessarily through legal means. They're potentially or widely believed to be undocumented. So if we were serious that was anathema to our security, we would have some robust e-verify in place. And it would be a tragedy, and it would be a shock to the system. It would have massive inflation. We just don't have a workforce that actually fills these positions. So we live in this limbo land, and I think that's partly why we don't actually have sincere conversations about this. So instead of Congress, because of congressional dysfunction, what we end up having instead is executive action. So, for example, DACA was, in June of an election year, President Obama reached out to say, hey, this is something I can do. There was less anxiety back then. There was less of what is perceived as an emergency back then. But still, it was doing something. And that, we expect our presidents to lead by the mechanisms that they have in place. So I don't think it's sincere to criticize Biden for taking executive actions as he did. So the question is, what did he do? Well, you talked about that asylum reform, which is widely panned as being against international law. It violates the commitment to give a fair hearing to asylum seekers. But still, I think it was a necessity, and I'll talk about why I think it was a necessity. But I think we should talk briefly about what it is, right? So asylum is that reform happened in the recent past, but the executive orders that have happened since then were in the face of the criticism from the progressive left. So to show that that the president and the White House supports a balanced approach to immigration and show the progressive left some degree of goodwill. These two executive actions yesterday. One, if you are married to a U.S. citizen, you are by law you are allowed to obtain a permanent legal status. It's just that the rules in place say, oh, you have to go back to your home country for some indeterminate time between 3 and 10 years. You're eligible for this, but you're going to have to disrupt your family. So it's not a very pro-family current law. So what this executive order does is it says, let's cut out that step. And let's actually, let these 500,000 people not do that, but instead if they pass a background check, and if they've been here 10 years or more, then they get access to work permits. They get deportation protection. They have, like I said, a path to a green card. And of course, this is going to get challenged in the courts, but the truth is that this is beneficial to employers. It's beneficial. It's pro-family. So I think it's justifiable. And I'll toss back to you. That's Executive Order 1. Like I said, people are saying it might even be more than 500,000. It might be as many as 1 million affected people. So it's a significant move towards progress.
Yeah, I mean, look, they even the Republicans are not serious about wanting to really stop undocumented immigration. If they wanted to stop it, if there was a serious interest in stopping it, they could do it tomorrow. They could simply criminalize seriously and with serious enforcement of hiring of undocumented immigrants. They could impose jail sentences or serious heavy fines. But then we'd end up paying, $10 to $12 a head for lettuce. We'd end up paying, a lot more. There would be economic issues across the country. It sent a shock across the country. In fact, already some of the immigration issues when we weren't having immigrants, it's already had some effects. Immigration was low because of the pandemic. There was actually a slowdown of immigration because people were afraid to come here because the pandemic was worse here than in Latin America for a brief period of time. And it had actually slowed down and people just weren't traveling in general. And that had an economic impact. We were actually short some workers. That's just a small taste of what would happen. So we know that's not going to happen. And we know that they are not going to want to make all of them into even legal residents because that takes away the sort of advantage that keeps a lot of the labor cheap sometimes. They are resisting the unionization of it, and there are people who are unionized. What people don't realize is people wonder, well, how are they paying into one of the arguments that we make when we're advocating for immigrant rights is they're paying into a social security system that they won't recover from. Well, how are they doing that? They don't pay taxes. Yes, they in fact do pay taxes because the IRS doesn't care if you're undocumented. You can get a tax ID number if they don't ask questions. You can get it's not a social security number. You can get a simple tax ID number, and as long as you're paying your taxes, they don't care. I believe that immigration isn't allowed to cross-reference those records because they want to get it. Remember, they got Al Capone on his taxes, right? This is what they are focused on. So this is not a serious thing. Immigration, we have a large country with a lot of space, and we have aging communities that could use an influx of younger families into the communities. We could use immigration the same way some of the European countries can really use the immigration. It is basically identity and bigotry at play here. They are scapegoats for other issues and for changes that people don't want to have. I mean, I won't say that it's never an issue, that immigration sometimes does cause certain problems, but anytime an immigrant, commits an act of murder, and it's bound to happen because, yes, there are millions of them here, but the murders committed by citizens far outweigh the murders committed by any type of immigrant, documented or otherwise. The fact of the matter is that the crime rates of immigrants are lower than the crime rates of citizens, and in fact, the lowest crime rate of the three groups are the legal residents because they have the most to lose. But even the undocumented immigrants have a lower crime rate than the citizens because they do have something to lose. They don't want to be caught. So but that is the issue. Somebody gets hurt by an immigrant, whether it's a car accident or anything else, it's the fault of illegal immigration, right? And it's just, so this is a demagogue issue. And so the sheer numbers, and I don't want to downplay it because the sheer numbers do have impacts on the southern border, towns and cities, because they're just dealing with the crowd there. And then as they spread into the other areas, it has less of an impact. It doesn't. We have plenty of undocumented immigrants right here in Humboldt County, and it doesn't have a negative impact at all. It really, I mean, it's just, and we could take more. I wish we would. So it just, at any rate, this is the issue, and recognizing this, unfortunately, this is not the political climate we're in to recognize this. And so, but Biden does represent a certain element of the politics of decency. And that's where this latter part of the policy comes. Will it blunt the political capital that he gained with hardcore, with the asylum quote unquote reform. I don't know. Some people are saying that, yeah, maybe he undid it with that, but I don't think so, because DACA is popular, and not splitting families is popular. I think that they've actually rolled it out the right way with the right framing. I'll let you close this out, Dave.
Yeah, so real quickly, there's also this second executive order that was released yesterday, which is for those DACA. You call them children, but they're, I think, college age now mostly. The deferred action for childhood arrivals. So they're not children. They're folks who arrived as children. About 400,000 people in that group are in college right now, and employers are afraid to hire them, even though they're like in college in the United States being trained here to have jobs. So these what this executive order does is it provides clarification for the D3 visa program, so that an employer can sponsor them and they can stay here, and then through their employer be eligible. These streamers can be eligible for green cards, permanent legal residency. So it's a way to normalize them, which, I mean, even before I really knew much about this issue, it made sense to me that, yeah, of course people aren't automatically going to, like, it's Democrats aren't saying you're a citizen now, here's where it's at. It's what they're saying is, work hard, earn, get skills training, get a job, get sponsored over time, normalize your relationship with the country. That way you're not in the shadows, because at 16 million people or so, you split the difference, between 12 and 20, that's 1 out of every 20 people. So it's we could talk more about this, I think, and we ought to, but generally speaking, the demagoguery is shifting the normalization. Like, it used to be people supported normalization. 2 out of 3 people in America support normalization. But now a majority of people are talking or saying to pollsters they support a national program to deport undocumented immigrants. And we don't have to get into the weeds on that, but it's 60-40. The only groups in America that are not 60-40 in favor of mass deportation right now are Democrats and people under 30. So it's really young people and Democrats that are saying, even at only 60-40, hey, there's something different has to happen. Other than those two groups, people are really shifting. The narrative is shifting. So I think Biden is exhibiting leadership to get ahead of it.
This brings us to Donald Trump's Veep stakes. We are down to, I believe, he has actually sent the vetting paperwork to the following people: Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, Doug Burgum, Elise Stefanik, Byron Donalds, Ben Carson, Tom Cotton, and J.D. Vance. One woman in that crowd, not on the list: Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Tucker Carlson, Kristi Noem, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Tulsi Gabbard. Those were other people who were at least vying for it, or names were being put up. Vivek didn't have a chance for a million reasons. Nikki Haley would probably win it for him, but there's just too much bad blood there, and his ego wouldn't do that. Noem killed her puppy. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Gabbard are just too crazy. Tucker Carlson, forget about. No way that was going to happen. So we're down to the other 9. Only one woman on the list, Elise Stefanik. I don't think she's going to make it. She's too charismatic. And as I've said before in my predictions, I'm going to stick to my prediction, which is Tim Scott. He needs a boring black candidate. And he's got 3 boring black candidates in that list. But I think he also needs Tim Scott's experience and gravitas in the party. You can be boring and still have gravitas. He's got some other boring people in there. But I think he's going to avoid anybody with any type of celebrity or possible upstaging him like J.D. Vance. Probably the best of the candidates would be Doug Burgum. And just from a statesmanship point of view, he actually did a pretty good job in his state as governor, not a real bad one. Again, boring as anything. And it's sort of like Mike Pence with a brain. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Marco Rubio. Nobody believes I don't think anybody takes seriously that he would be picked. Trump doesn't like him. He's on the list because all of these people are people who donors have been pushing, and he's got Marco Rubio on the list so that he can look at the donors and say, see, he's on my list, but he's not going to pick Marco Rubio. It's not even bad blood. He didn't like him way back in didn't like little Marco way back in 2016. And the way Rubio went out as a total loser in the 2016 campaign as a robot, I just don't think that's going to happen. So I'm sticking with my prediction, but we can discuss some of the others. But I'm going to let you in on this, Dave.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for that setup. That was extensive, as always. Yeah, like you mentioned, there's a month to go before the convention, so it's time. Vetting is underway, and this topic is making the rounds in both political and media circles. So, I think there's two things I would like to put out there to frame this. One is that according to Politico, a Trump insider speaking on condition of anonymity said that even though they're vetting the list of people that you described, that he's really the top of the list. The higher tier of consideration is made up of Vance, Burgum, and Rubio. So I'll talk about those 3 in a second, but I think it's worth mentioning from my perspective. Like you said, hey, like, who do we think is going to win, right? Who do we think is going to make it? The primary prism to view this selection process is that I think Trump's going to select someone who is complementary in the sense that that person will energize the base, satisfy the skeptics, and potentially draw in new supporters. So with that in mind, let's talk about Doug Burgum. I think you're right. Trump has said, he has the look of a VP. He does well in media. He's a wealthy businessman. He self-funded his campaign. But he ran for president against Trump. And he's not particularly MAGA in any way. He doesn't pull in any other groups that could benefit Trump at the margins. So I think at the bottom line, he just doesn't significantly add enough. He'll get some kind of cabinet position that's commensurate with being the governor of North Dakota, potentially Secretary of Energy, I think is what's being floated. I'm going to skip to Rubio because I tend to agree with you. He does have mainstream political appeal. He's a 3-term senator with foreign policy experience. He's Cuban descent, so he's Spanish fluent. But his beef with Trump is infamously contentious. And also he's proven, he didn't do very well in the presidential debates, and he did terribly in the response to the State of the Union speech a while back. Oh, yeah. So he's got some flaws, but the major flaw with him and a couple of the other people on the list, the larger list, not the short list, is that you can't be from Florida because Trump's already from Florida. So Trump could say to Rubio, hey, I'll tell you what, like, maybe but go move out of state, change residency. And I just don't see that happening. That's the same thing with the representative Byron Donalds. I don't think Byron Donalds is moving anywhere. He's from Florida. He's in queue to become like governor of Florida. So he's got no incentive to move. So I think Rubio it's difficult to see how he overcomes the fact that he's from Florida and that he's got a beef with Trump. So I don't think that's happening. So just taking the Trump people on their word, the leaker, that leaves J.D. Vance. And then now you see the stars in alignment. Strong MAGA credentials as a fighter. He's a Yale Law School grad, so he's considered articulate and witty and effective. He was a veteran. He appeals to younger voters. He appeals to rural voters. And in his back pocket is that he has very strong relationships with Silicon Valley fundraisers, donors, rather. So he's got, big money behind him. He has a little bit less experience, or actually arguably much less experience than you would expect in a vice president, only 2 years so far. He actually did speak out against Trump before. So he's called Trump America's Hitler. He's called Trump cultural poison. But I think he is one of the top two contenders here, or three even, for a reason, because he has a credible appeal with the base. He could hang in there with Kamala Harris in debates and arguably do what Trump wishes he could do to really hammer home in a vice presidential debate setting. So I'll leave it at that for now. That's my take on the top three, and see if you have any feedback or you want to dive into some other people.
Well, I just checked him out because an earlier leaker said that Trump would only pick a VP with a hot wife. All three of those have hot wives, so I don't know. For all I know, all of them do, but except for Stefanik, of course. I don't know. If I was to pick those from those three, I would say Doug Burgum. Yes, he has been critical of him. He's not of the never Trumper crowd, but he is of the same wing, and maybe he would be concerned about loyalty there. Who knows?
Definitely.
I just don't see Marco Rubio, so it would have to be J.D. Vance. But there's a few concerns there. J.D. Vance then gets pulled out of the Senate, and although Ohio is fairly red, it's not an absolute guarantee. And the Democrats he was up against a pretty good candidate who could come in, and if they don't have a really good candidate, could conceivably lose that Senate seat in the future, something the Republicans have to consider, although I don't know if Trump cares that much about the Senate or any of that type of the party issues there. And yeah, if it's down to those three, then obviously he doesn't care about having a black VP. He just named the three of them, but he is really trying to get a big chunk of the black vote. I don't know that he's necessarily, again, this is a big debate here. He's brought in a lot of people who haven't voted in the past, right? So is he necessarily drawing black voters who have voted Democratic in the past, or is he just bringing in people who've never voted before, like he did with white voters in 2016? And probably a combination of both. There are people who are saying that they weren't. And so, but does he need to have a VP, a black VP, and do any of those three? Would they make any difference in terms of drawing the black vote? I don't know. But definitely, if it's going to be those three, my bet would have been Burgum, but given what you've just said, J.D. Vance, the only thing I'd say about J.D. Vance is he's also sometimes gets kind of goofy and has some kind of gaffes, but maybe Trump doesn't care about that. I mean, he's certainly nobody to, throw stones about that, right? So, maybe he wants somebody he can relate to there. And J.D. Vance is certainly loyal. I mean, he has, whatever he said in the past, back when he was like going on tours with his book and doing NPR interviews, that J.D. Vance is long gone. He's buried that one. He doesn't even talk about that book anymore, right? So, in fact, I don't think he talks about books anymore. I mean, he's like full on into this new role. And you notice that I think the other reason Marco Rubio might be on that list is because Marco Rubio, during and after the 34 conviction verdict was outright just come out. This is a blatant misuse of the judicial of the criminal justice system, an outrage, a travesty. And Rubio was just like out front of all the mainstream Republicans, the most outspoken. I mean, he was on every channel, even came onto CNN to rant about it. So he definitely wanted that spot. And so that probably earned him this top three, and maybe it'll get him some type of cabinet position. Who knows? Maybe he's tired of being senator. Who knows? So it's, so I don't know. J.D. Vance sounds reasonable. I'm going to stick to Tim Scott because he also was that one, and I'm not sure I trust these leaks, but
Right.
I don't know. But again, I don't know. The hot wife leak sounds plausible, right? It just but the leaks the leaks from his camp have been inaccurate in the past, but partly because he changes his mind on a dime.
Yeah.
So they could have been accurate, and then he just changes his mind. Will he change his mind on this? I don't know. But given that, I would have said Burgum, but now more I'm thinking about it, I think J.D. Vance makes sense of those three.
So just to give you some credit.
How about we haven't discussed Tom Cotton or Stefanik yet, other than the fact Stefanik is a charismatic, smart woman, and no way would he have a charismatic, smart woman as VP.
So I was going to give some props to Tim Scott because I actually agree with you that he's in that top tier, whether the leaker said so or not. In fact, we could make the case. Having the first black man on the GOP ticket appeals to black voters, which expands the potential set of people who are going to turn out in support of Trump. Tim Scott has legit evangelical credentials, which, that was Pence's strongest benefit to the Trump ticket before. In addition, Pence had strong connections to the Koch Industries campaign financing, while Tim Scott's got very strong connections to Wall Street, billionaires and others, a whole set of billionaires that are backing Tim Scott. So in addition to he's the what's it called, the by your bootstraps narrative. The only black person ever to serve in both chambers of Congress. So Tim Scott's got a lot going for him, but I'll pivot to, as you mentioned, I'm going to skip Elise Stefanik first. Actually, let's just go for it. Elise Stefanik, rising star in the GOP, former GOP party leader, fiercely loyal. She's earned her MAGA credibility. Having a woman and mother on the ticket takes Trump to places that he does not go without that. So again, expanding would be a smart strategy to expand to suburban women voters in particular. She has a sort of a mainstream background with the Bush White House and former Speaker Paul Ryan. And you could say she might be more helpful in her current role to Trump, but I think she's right up there, as Trump would benefit wildly from having her there, and she's capable of doing a great job against Kamala Harris too. So I don't know if you want to talk about Tom Cotton, or you want me to do it?
Why don't you talk about Tom Cotton?
Yeah, so Tom Cotton, lots of military foreign policy experience, Senate experience, MAGA credentials. Thing is, he hasn't done very much. So I would say like the number one thing is that he doesn't really expand Trump's base. So there's nothing that he brings to the table that Trump doesn't already have. Also, it's widely believed he's going to be potentially the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State. So the last thing on this is that he's a strong supporter of Ukraine aid, which is off-brand for Trump and the isolationist wing of the party. So I think he doesn't meet the bar.
Yeah. I want to quickly remark, because I was asked a question recently. How come presidential candidates no longer, it used to be the philosophy that you want to pick somebody from a swing state to help you get that swing state, and nobody's done that in a long time. Obama and neither of his opponents did that. Romney sort of, but no, from Connecticut, that's not a swing state. Pardon me. Neither Biden nor Trump did that. I just don't think it means anything. I don't think your VP candidate, it sure didn't help Gore in that. Anyway, it's just I think it was a myth. I think the professionals have realized that it doesn't really make a difference who you pick as VP any more than it makes a difference where you hold your convention. Last segment, the politics of in vitro fertilization, which is a technology that has helped thousands of couples start families where they've been unable to do so because of fertility issues of various types. And I personally know a family that there was no way they were going to be able to have children without it. Ended up having two beautiful twin girls who are adults now. I mean, it is a scientific miracle that they're able to do this. It's expensive, and so you can kind of argue that maybe it's something that is only offered to people with the means. Although there are some of it programs out there with scholarships and availability, not a lot of them out there, but you can find them. But the point is that it's a choice. What's involved, of course, with in vitro fertilization is you get a number of embryos that are selected and they're frozen, and then not all of them get used. Some of them the ones that don't get used eventually get destroyed. If you are of the theology or philosophy that once the egg has been fertilized, that it is human life, then this becomes problematic. And so it is the contention that that by doing this, human beings are playing God and shouldn't be doing this at all, and that these embryos should be given funerals or whatever at this point, and that this should not be done again ever. Never mind that the vast majority of embryos never, just biologically, never come to life. I think it's something like 70% of them fail early on. I mean, just by natural biology, but they would say that's God's will. Leave that to God. And so, but still, that's an interesting theological question. 70% of human beings never get to the cell splitting stage. I mean, come on, what is that? That you at least address that question, but don't just say, well, that's God's will. That's a cop out. But anyway, this is the politics we're in. We've talked about it briefly last week as the Democrats passed a bill. We talked about it being deliberately set up to embarrass and put the Republicans in a tough position. I made a prediction that most of the Republicans would vote against it. They actually killed it with a bill blocking it procedurally, which made the same headlines. And I think that the Democrats could have maneuvered around that blocking, but they didn't have to. They got the headline they were looking for. Republicans block in vitro fertilization while saying they support it. And they had their own bills, which the Democrats called basically gamesmanship themselves. These bills would have allowed the states to collect federal funds, but not the facilities that barred IVF procedures could not collect federal funds. Well, all that means is that you can have hospitals that don't even offer reproductive services collecting federal funds. The Democratic bill would have said if you're a state that allows this to happen, you don't get to collect the federal funds. Period. And the Republicans voted against that. So, anyways, this is the day before that. The Southern Baptist Convention declared their position that an embryo is human life. There are several states that have passed that law, including Alabama. Alabama has passed some protection for IVF providers and patients, but they have not changed the wording that states that your life begins at conception. Texas has that wording, and a few other states have that wording, that human life becomes viable and protectable as human life at conception, and therefore embryos are human beings. This is taking us into a different kind of territory now, because a lot of people, including very many religious people, see IVF as pro-family. Here's an opportunity for a couple who don't have a family, to have children. They are going forth and multiplying, begatting, as they are supposed to do under biblical tradition. They're not hurting anybody except embryos, because there's more than one embryo involved in the process, and not all the embryos are going to be allowed to proceed towards birth and humanity as the rest of us will consider it being a human being. And so this is going to lead to very intricate politics. Dave?
Intricate politics indeed. So thank you for that setup, as always. I think that, again, it might be important to highlight that, I looked at a bunch of different sources and the numbers vary slightly, but, rough math, about 2% of all the births in America are from IVF. So over 8 million people have known to have been born from this procedure. Others say 10 million when you count some of the other assisted reproductive technologies that aren't technically IVF. It has a success rate, again, depending on where you look and depending on the age of the people trying it. Somewhere around 37% was one source. So it's not like guaranteed that it's going to happen. There's odds involved. So that's why they implant so many. That's why they prepare so many of these embryos. And I think that there's two ways to look at this. One, really three. At the highest level, it's widely popular because it affects so many people. So for example, some survey research shows that across all of Americans, it's about 86th percentile that think it should be legal. But if you look at, Republican surveys of Republicans, they still come up with, pro-life people, about 78% say they support it. And among evangelical Christians, it's 83%. All three of these numbers are extremely close to the bell curve, meaning like, in effect, nearly all Americans support it. So it's not just pro-family. It's actually like widely accepted that it's something that should in fact be protected. So that's the one angle. I'll try to be a little quicker on the other two. You talked about the Southern Baptists. The reason Southern Baptists decision to vote against this, to vote in favor of a resolution condemning it, is because they have 13 million members. It's the largest Protestant denomination in America, and many scholars think that if you can assess where Southern Baptists are going on any given policy issue, it provides insight to other evangelicals, other Protestant groups. So it's informative beyond just the vote of these 10,000 or so messengers. When they vote, they need to pass, I think it's like about a 60 odd percent threshold, 2/3, so maybe like 66% or something. And so when they held this vote recently, they voted in favor of, here's a quote, reaffirming the unconditional value and right to life of every human being, including those in the embryonic stage, and to only utilize reproductive technologies consistent with that affirmation, especially in the number of embryos generated in the process. So really what it comes down to is they're going to have to try to like split the, I don't want to use the biblical metaphor, but thread the needle here, in that, people want to be able to do it, but you also want to have respect for those frozen embryos, basically. So I think that's where it's going to play out. But here's the thing. Here's the last thing I'll say, that in reality, now that Roe v. Wade has gone back to the states, fetal personhood is that next big frontier for the anti-abortion movement. So this is where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, and I mean, how do you have it both ways? Is it a human or isn't it? Well, how do you show respect? Once you have the children you want, then what happens to those other embryos? Are they supposed to be named? Should they be given social security numbers and funerals? I mean, you really have to think this through if that's the position you're going to take. And I don't want to denigrate somebody's religious beliefs, but on the other hand, there's nothing in the Bible about embryos. I'm sorry. That's just, at the time, the belief was that the men had the seed and it was planted and the woman was simply the vessel. That is the whole concept of the virgin birth, right? I mean, that was that was how they believed it worked. I don't know that everybody necessarily believed that, because they had to have some concept as to how a child took on the certain attributes of the woman. So there must have been some people that said, no, there must be some more to it than that. But that was how it was believed at the time. And so there was nothing to it. What they use often to show that there was a conscious human life was late in the terms. There is a scene in one of the Gospels, maybe the others, I'm not sure which, because you have to distinguish it. It wouldn't have been the book of John. It would have to have been one or more of the synoptic Gospels, where John the Baptist is in fetal form. The two pregnant women are coming together, and John the Baptist is trying to move closer to Mary to be closer to Jesus, right? And so obviously there must be some sort of sentience in that situation. They're both being close to birth, and so that would be late term anyway. But how much further do you want to go to it? On the other hand, elsewhere in the Bible, it talks about how somebody breathed the life of air into them. I mean, so there's a lot of, it just depends on what Bible quote you're talking about. And so you can't, I don't have that quote right, but basically breathing was the essence of life, and all consistent with the science of the time, or the lack of it or whatever. But so to try to apply that, they're in this weird position. Where they have to believe this. So what are they going to do with it? Southern Baptist Convention has now put it out there. An embryo is a human life. So what do they mean by you can do this as long as you're showing respect to the embryos? You can't just show respect and then let them die. I mean, that's a very difficult position. How are they going to handle this? And Alabama right now has a contradictory situation there. It's a human being worthy of protection, but we're protecting the doctors and the patients. We're going to let them allow them to murder these embryos. They've got a logical problem there, and the Democrats are going to make use of it every single time they have the opportunity to. What are the Republicans going to do with this? Well, Trump doesn't care. He's not a conservative. He's nothing. He's whatever he needs to be to have power, right? So he doesn't care. He's probably not even going to let him discuss it at the convention. This stuff, they don't care about this, but the people who believe this, and by the way, in vitro fertilization, I'm forgetting the name of the place kicker already for Kansas City. He says it's who?
Budker.
Yeah, he said in his speech, it's playing God. It shouldn't be done. That's his belief. He's Catholic. There are those that believe that. And in a close election, the Republicans can't afford to alienate the people they believe that. So they need to walk a tight line and wink and nod at them while, saying that they support it for the almost every other American who does. They're in a jam, and Democrats are going to take every opportunity to exploit that.
I think you're right. I'll say this. If that 8 million number is correct, right, we're talking about 1 out of every 40 people or so was born this way in America.
That sounds high to me, but maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's the lower of the numbers too. I looked at a few different resources. Yeah. But so and what, not to say whatever dismissively, but regardless of what the actual number is, the politics is complicated, because so many people, like the 85th percentile, believe that this is something that they should be able to do. So much so that immediately after the Alabama Supreme Court said that, hey, these are people and this can't happen, the state passed a law that overrode it. And Senators Ted Cruz and Katie Britt came out, made the rounds in the media, supported a pro-IVF law. The reason that they gave that the Republicans squashed the Democratic law, as you could imagine, they don't want to give the Democrats a win, and they said it was because there was language in that bill that was also supportive of abortion, which they immediately said unconditional abortion, which they immediately said was late-term abortion, right. Despite that being, I think the number is like less than 2% or even maybe even less than 1% of all abortions are after week 21. So that's dogma, not leadership. But anyway, it's so complicated as an issue that even House Speaker Mike Johnson, let's come full circle here, House Speaker Mike Johnson is a Southern Baptist. And he was a former trustee of one of these organizations that's quoted heavily in their rhetoric against this policy, or this practice rather. So he now publicly, he'll say he does support IVF in its pro-family aspect, but he will not comment on whether he thinks that the destruction of unused embryos is murder, because obviously it's such a challenging spot to be in. So I think this tension is going to play out as people try to process this, and knowing that it's just so widely popular that it's probably, people wouldn't accept it being banned.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. What do you have, Dave?
Well, consistent with my often practice of commenting on something that we spoke about during the show, I'm going to speak to vice presidential choice for Donald Trump to join the ticket. I think in the past, I really strongly felt that his style was going to be to pick someone like Kristi Noem, who he, could say, would be a woman that would bring in more support that he couldn't garner on his own. But Kristi Noem kind of shot herself in the foot, so to speak, with her book. And so he's forced to pivot, and he's in an unenviable position of having, a difficult choice. My prediction is based on what I said about J.D. Vance, that being from Ohio, being a strong MAGA fighter, Yale law graduate, military credentials, appeals to young and rural voters, has a solid donor base. He can raise funds in Silicon Valley. And that he is like I said, he could go toe-to-toe with Kamala Harris in a way that Donald Trump will strongly favor. I think he's got strong contender, credible appeal to the base, and he'll be the choice for a VP candidate.
All right, I'll be real quick here. There was a primary race in Virginia yesterday. The chair of the Freedom Caucus, Representative Bob Good, probably one of the most conservative members of Congress, faced a challenge from the state senator John McGuire, who was backed by Trump. because ostensibly a number of Republicans were upset with Bob Good because he's the one who one of the people who voted against McCarthy and created a lot of chaos in Congress. Personally, I think Trump backed him, backed his opponent because he backed DeSantis in the presidential races. But either way, Bob Good is a true conservative. And he is in a real tough race. He's actually behind by several hundred votes. They haven't finished counting yet. There's probably going to be a recount because anybody, if it's under 1%, is entitled to a recount. So whoever loses is going to get that recount. Doesn't really matter who wins. He may survive like Mace survived last month, also another person in a similar position. But these are conservatives, real conservatives. MAGA is not a conservative movement. It has one ideology: vote for Trump. It's an identity movement. It is not an ideological movement. My prediction is that there's going to be very little conservative politics being discussed at the convention, and that Republicans, for the time being, are abandoning ideology, and that Burkean conservatism for the time being is dead. We are looking at an ideology of authoritarianism and Trumpianism, and this election meant the end of it, of Republican conservatism as we knew it for the time being. We'll find out if I'm right, and it's a scary thought, quite frankly. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.